This conversation is an abridged version taken from a recent live stream done on my Twitch channel, of which you can find the link for in the description. What if using that existing engine compromised your overall vision? What if that existing engine wasn't capable of making the game that you wanted to make? Then what would you do? Why not just make the game that you want to make and put something together that helps you achieve that? Why must it be fast? Why must it be done as expediently as possible? Why? Why not take joy in the process of constructing and creating your vision and then letting that process lead you to whatever possible innovations that may come? Why must it be expedient? Why does everything have to be rushed? What's the hurry? Creating a custom engine takes a great deal of time, as I'm sure you know. No, it's a fallacy. It's a fallacy, it's a fallacy, it's a fallacy. Just like as I was saying that the idea of needing to make a decent game requires lots of huge amounts of money behind it and so on. I was having a discussion with someone else when I was streaming Boneworks. The thing is, right, is that you might say creating an operating system is difficult. Creating this and that is difficult, and yes, it is, but the thing is that we used to do it all the time. This is the really important key part that we seem to be forgetting. We used to do this all the time. Nearly every single game that came out, especially before 10 years ago, used its own engine. And every developer was doing that, and it was fine. There wasn't a game famine or anything like that. It was done all the time. And what these companies like to make you think, in order to justify needing them and their existence, is that, oh, it's all so difficult to do. If you didn't have us, then it would just be so difficult. Barely any games would be made. They would all run terribly. It's rubbish. It's a fallacy. And furthermore, for things like operating systems, when you look at things like Windows and Linux, you would think, yes, building an operating system is difficult, and so on and so forth. Based upon the complexity of it now and how bloated operating systems are, yes, it certainly would be. However, before even I was born, operating systems were being made for every game that came out. Nearly every game that ran on a PC came on a boot disk. You know, the little floppy disks? And those themselves were operating systems that were written and coded for the game, so that the entire PC itself, all of the resources were dedicated to running that game, rather than having to run an operating system and all these things in the background. So it's a fallacy. This is what we have been led to believe, because we have become entrenched in those companies having a monopoly. Nearly all games had their own engine or mishmash of plugins that make an engine, and we did fine. And they had their own identity, they had unique mechanics that you wouldn't see anywhere else. They weren't so heavy in being generic and similar to all the others. We did fine. So, that is what I have to say in regards to the comment of making a custom engine takes a great deal of blah-de-blah-de-blah. No. It can be done, it has been done for so long, and we got along just fine. We have severely bloated things. For that reason, we also need to consider how, whilst what we can do with our worlds is more complex, we would have also have developed technology and systems to simplify that process, and as we have gotten used to it and more skilled at doing so, and developed technology and systems that streamline the process as a natural part of this, then it's quite relative, I would say. Maybe not completely, but I would be willing to say that it's a relative process. Yes, it becomes more complex, but we then build plugins and tools and develop skills that offset that complexity. At the end of the day, having to program even a basic 2D sprite game back in the time of the technology available was still very difficult and complex because of our lack of knowledge and understanding and proper tools to do so. But then we built those, and it became easier, and then we progressed accordingly. So it's rubbish. It's like creating a new programming language now. You could do it, but it would take forever to make something that matches the functionality and quality of existing languages. Yes, But does that mean that we shouldn't do it? Does that mean that the current languages that we have are the de facto best and only thing? Does it mean that the current languages cannot be improved or have major drawbacks and limitations that could be eliminated by looking into a new way of doing things? This is the trap that we fall into as people and a populace, in that we get comfortable with one thing and we cease to believe that anything else can be done or happen. We lose that adventurous nature with those things. We see that something works to a certain degree and quality, and we just give up on the idea that maybe it could be better or different, you know? And then we begin to get bloated monopolies that have control over these things, much like Microsoft, Unity, Unreal, and then everything suffers as a result. And at the end of the day, I don't think it's an arguable fact that the current systems that we have are so convoluted and bloated with millions of lines of code that no one knows what it's doing, that we have to keep on working around over and over and over again. And that's not a sustainable situation at all. That will eventually implode, because if it gets to a point where no one knows what is going on with the millions of lines of code that's doing something under whatever program that you're writing, how can we debug? How can we improve? How can we optimize? If we're just trying to build workarounds all the time on top of problems that we don't understand or know how to deal with, or even couldn't even comprehend because it's buried under millions and millions of lines of code, then the foundation will collapse. And the mindset of, oh, there's nothing else that we could possibly do now is what encourages this to happen. I will say it doesn't justify lazy or poor quality, but it's understandable that you'd stick with what already works. Creating something new for the sake of being new doesn't just make sense unless you have truly innovative idea to justify its creation. Well, here's the thing, is that when we make something new or innovative, do we really know how innovative it can be until we get going? The key point is that we get started. The key point is that we look at something and we don't think this is the only way it could ever be. If we kept that mindset in general for most things, then we would not have the technology that we take for granted now. If someone thought that hand washing against a hand washing board was the best that things could possibly be, and that will never change, well, then no one would ever have created the washing machine. The notion of something being hard is an absolute nonsense and rubbish reason to just give up on making things better or more intuitive. And one thing always leads to another as well. We never truly know what we're doing or what is going to happen until we get going. You don't know how it's going to go. You only understand or have an idea as you're doing it. You might have an end goal in mind of, I want to achieve this, but the actual process, you don't know exactly how it's going to go, and nearly every time it never does go as you think it will. The same would be true of music, the same would be true of movies, the same would be true of video editing for my creations as well. You never really know how it's going to go, if it will be innovative, if it will be engaging. And it is sheer fallacy of binding ourselves to those notions of we have to know how these things are, or that we think that nothing else can be done. This is what leads to monopolies and homogenization and just a sheer lack of creativity in general. And that's where civilization and society begins to fall and stagnate. It's when that mind takes over. And that can be observed through history. When the civilizations get stuck in a particular route or way of things being, and they do not attempt to think what else can be done, then they inevitably collapse. Again, look at any fallen civilization. That's what's happened. And the ironic thing is that those very same civilizations, is that they would have been in exactly the same position and mindset as well. They would have looked at their civilization and just think, well, this is all that it can be, this is the best that it can be, whilst things just fell apart. I simply don't have the mind to program something innovative. I work much better with iteration than creating anew, which is fine, which is absolutely fine. But the thing is that I don't think anyone actually ever sets out to make something innovative. That's my point, is that the creative process only happens by the doing, in the moment. I don't think it's even possible for us to conceive the idea of doing something innovative until by the action of just doing something, and that something itself doesn't have to be innovative, and it wouldn't be. Just by doing that, by taking those steps, do we then begin to see the path towards how something may be different. The key point is in the doing. I also don't consider myself someone with any innovative ideas at all, actually. But I understand that if I ever produce a video or content that might be considered innovative or fresh or new or dynamic, I can promise you 1,000% that I would never have any idea of how I would do that until maybe going through the process of just wanting to make something, and then step by step. It may or may not amount to something, but it's never something that's planned. Such people still exist, even if it's less common nowadays. Much of creativity has been stifled in favor of metrics and monetary gain, but there will always be innovators in the midst of stagnation. Yeah, absolutely. However, if it can't change, it's too difficult, you need all of this to do any change, mindset remains to be the dominant prolific force, then those people they simply won't have the encouragement or the chance to show themselves. And that's what I personally see happening now. One point that I can also elaborate on as well is that the creators of Linux, they did an interview a while ago, quite a long while ago, where they're sat there, and one of the things that he says, to further back up the notion of what I'm saying, is that he was talking about the process, and then he said, very importantly, and then at some point we realized, or I realized, that we're just 2 or 3 weeks away from an operating system. So again, and this is for the makers of Linux, they were coding stuff. They were just doing whatever they were doing. And it's only after they just took those little steps, step by step, of coding whatever they wanted to code, and then they took a step back and looked at the big picture like, oh, we could actually make an operating system. And so then they realized that, and they did it. They didn't set out to make one. It was just doing coding stuff, following whatever instinct or feeling and whatever they wanted to do, and those little pieces came together and, oh, I can make an operating system, and that's where the innovation happens. It's the automatic mindset of, it's too difficult, it's too big. Well, if you're directly comparing to what already exists, then yes, but we never begin like that anyway. Never. Never, never, never. We just begin with a single step. If you imagine yourself making a new game engine, imagine this. You think, okay, I want to make a game. Now, I want the sound. I want it to have atmospheric 3D sound. So you look into sound engines and systems. You look at the various offerings made. Or if you are really that talented, you might even code your own. But let's imagine that you're looking at various different sound plugins and things as well, and you browse through them. And you find one, you hear its examples, and you think, yes, that would be a good fit for my game. So you then have the sound engine component. You know roughly how to code it together into something functioning and so on and so forth. And then you think, okay, I've got the sound. Now I want to do something with texture handling, all of that stuff, and so you have a look into those offerings as well. That's how an engine is built. That's how everyone used to do it. There were always things available, and of course there were some occasions when they would be custom coded, which is great, very talented, or that someone would be hired into the dev team that would specialize in coding that particular area. And then you take one step. Okay, I have the sound, I have the textures, I now have a 3D modeling engine, and then that all comes together and makes an engine. And you can see that if you just take it one step at a time, rather than thinking about, I must make a whole engine, then it's very doable, it's very feasible. We need to stop looking at the peak of the mountain and instead look down, because climbing to the peak of a mountain when you're standing at the base seems impossible, because you're taking in the entire journey, and that in itself is daunting and scary and feels impossible. Head down, look at your next step. Check online for sound systems. Okay, contact those people. Next step, I have something, and so on and so forth. That's all that we need to do, and we have been doing that just fine. Other people recognize stagnation and will use the opportunity to benefit themselves by making something new. Monopoly is unlikely to happen in gaming due to the competition found from other studios. A monopoly is already happening in gaming. Microsoft have just purchased Bethesda. Sony have just purchased Bungie. And we can already see it happening quite clearly. The big companies are purchasing up all of the remaining independent game studios, and any of the newer devs are having to default to the limitations of Unity and Unreal to make even the most basic and rudimentary games. The monopoly is already very apparent. And not to forget that Microsoft owns basically the only operating system that anyone uses as well. The publishers as well, who have been doing the same for a while now, and the Unity and Unreal domination for any new devs that have to basically, it's like, you can imagine the mindset, it's Unity or Unreal or nothing, because of that same mindset, making my own engine, which is just a mishmash of different plugins and things. Making my own engine is impossible. It's that mindset. They've already given up. It's impossible. Don't even look into it. It's impossible. Too difficult, too hard. Just use the pre-built engine, done. And this is where the monopoly and the stagnation happens. And I haven't seen any proof that it's benefiting games at all. For maybe Square Enix, who have and Nintendo, who have very talented devs with decades of experience behind them, yes. But again, that's the fringe example. If the mindset of the populace can be encouraged that there is only one way to do things, or one vendor, or a handful of them that we can only ever use, then that in itself will limit any opportunity. If the public are successfully brainwashed into thinking that only Apple phones are worthwhile, or only Windows is usable, or only Windows is what should be used, or only Unreal. If they're brainwashed into thinking that everything else except for these products are too difficult and too big, it's impossible. If they're brainwashed into doing that, well then, there you go. Another key point as well is having the experience to know that it doesn't have to be that way. Having prior knowledge of how things worked and being able to directly compare that is very important too. And if you don't have that, then it's quite hard to see the comparison and how, it doesn't have to be that particular way. I wouldn't have said anything that I have said if the present conditions showed me that the quality of games and the media and creativity was improved because of the present conditions, which I can very clearly say that it has not. The standard, the lowest standard, is dropping more and more and more. We are quite notably seeing a regression in the interactivity and mechanics of games, especially in the visuals as well. The visuals that are being output on games versus the sheer power of our CPUs and GPUs, considering how much performance those visuals cost versus the sheer power of our GPUs in itself just shows how worse and inefficient we have become. It's difficult, it's tough. Impossible, can't be the same as all the others. It's just a fallacy, and it's exactly that mind. I'm green, and it's exactly that mindset that leads to the domination and stagnation that we are witnessing.